Yeah, that shit was funny as fuck. What's up? Nothing much. You're gonna hear a bunch of background noise, so my apologies for that. So, give me 1 sec. Hold up. Okay, so yeah, I'm pretty sure you believe that the logical problem of evil is a successful argument against God's existence, assuming that God is like an omnipotent being.
That's how you read. Depending on your definition of God, it can be. I don't think it's an issue with all definitions of God. I think the Bayesian problem of evil is one that applies to all good God.
Yeah, I remember we had an unfinished conversation regarding the LPOE, specifically being a successful argument or evidence against the proposition that God exists, assuming that by God there's stipulating omnibenevolence, which is a morally perfect being, just to be clear, right?
Yeah, if you have a being which is all-knowing and all-powerful and all good, then yeah, I would say I would say the logical problem is evil is an issue with that definition of God. Yeah.
Okay, so to be clear, let's say someone defines an all-good being as just a moral agent, or just an all-good entity. It's just a moral agent, which is perfect insofar as it has never committed any moral action. Do you think there's a contradiction?
No. I think it only comes when you can when you know all the bad things that are happening and you sit there doing nothing about it. That's when the issue happens.
Yeah, I'm stipulating that like God knows all the facts of the universe. Like he knows all things, right? He knows all the things which will happen and which are currently happening and which has happened. So he knows all the facts. And he's also omnipotent insofar as he has the ability to change these facts over time. He's in control of all the possibilities. And also, he satisfies the definition I've just provided of omnipotent.
He could change all facts, right?
Yeah, like he has the ability, right?
Yeah. So then there's no fact that you'll be able to. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's no fact you'll be able to give me, right? There's not a fact that's going to exist out there that God couldn't change. Agreed?
That God couldn't change.
Yeah, he could change all facts, you said.
Yeah, when I said God can change all facts, it means in the sense where it is the case that for a given fact X at time 0, it is the case that that fact can come out of a state from existence to non-existence insofar as in time 1, for example, it is no longer a fact.
So there's no fact God can't change, okay?
Well, given the definition I've given, it would be the case that God can change facts, but it really depends on the semantics.
Yeah, so there's no fact that God can't change, yes?
Depends on if you believe that that specific proposition is incompatible with necessitarianism, which I am a necessitarian, by the way. So what do you think about that?
So you're a necessitarian, but I'm sure you'd say something like God can change what's necessary.
No.
God doesn't dictate the metaphysical laws?
Necessary, it doesn't... Excuse me?
God doesn't define the metaphysical law?
Metaphysical law, what do you define as a metaphysical law?
But when you say necessary, I'm guessing you're using the metaphysical modal scope. So just the things that are necessary, the things that are entailed by metaphysical laws?
Well, I take metaphysical modality to be kind of identical to logical modality. I just believe that like
God changed. Yeah. Does logic pre-exist God? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that like, so for things that you believe to be logically possible, it's really just possible insofar as imagination is concerned, but I believe that it is an illusion created from the fact that we don't possess divine knowledge.
Okay, so you think there is some fact which justifies any particular thing that happens?
By justifies, in what sense of justification are you talking about?
Like, is there a reason why it's still the best state of affairs? Whatever happens is the best state of affairs.
Motivational reasons, normative reasons, epistemic reasons, clarify. Okay, so, yeah, of course, I believe that there's a normative reason which justifies all events which occurs in the universe, despite all events being caused fundamentally by the existence of God.
Okay, and that proposition is one you know to be true, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so no matter what you do, you know there's some justification for why it happened.
Yeah.
So if you were to beat a baby to death with a shovel, you would know it's justified.
No. It's not justified for me to do it, but it's justified for God to create a circumstance in which that's happened.
Well, you know that there's some justification for it occurring, right? You brought about its occurrence?
Yeah, we can just say that justification, in the normative sense, it is going to be indexed to whether or not there's some sense of moral accountability, right? So, for instance, let's say, for example, I do an action, okay? For that action, or for me to do something which is immoral, for it to classify me as an immoral agent, at least in that context, you'd have to be making the proposition that I was morally accountable, correct?
Well, you would say you are morally accountable if you beat a baby to death with a shovel, right?
Yeah, I just don't believe that moral accountability crosses over to God. And so, for any event...
That's fine. You just think it doesn't matter if it crosses over to God. But that's not the argument.
Okay.
You're saying there's some fact that justifies it. And if that's a fact that you know to be true, you know that there's some fact that justifies it. So you're aware of there being a justification for the action of you beating a child.
It justifies the
if
action?
You choose to do so.
Yeah, so...
It justifies you doing an action is bringing about a state of affairs, yeah. So
you're using the language really weirdly. So usually when you're talking about an action being justified, we're talking about an action being justified indexed to the person committing the action or any specific thing which is involved in the causal chain of that action being justified or being done.
Well, that means to do an action is to bring about a state of affairs, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So if there's some justification for a particular state of affairs, then there was a justification for bringing about the state of affairs.
Yeah, that's just a tautology, but what I'm arguing here is simply, when you're saying justification for a state of affairs, right, the idea that I'm really trying to get across here is simply that when you're talking about normative justification, we're usually baking in moral accountability with it. So for instance, we say an action is justified specifically based on which person we are assessing when assessing that action. So we're usually assessing two things. So the person who executes the action, or anything which is involved in the causal chain of that action, and the action itself and the consequences from that action. So I'm saying that when you're saying the action is justified, are you saying it is justified holistically or independently of any specific entity which is involved in the action, or are you specifically indexing it to a particular entity?
So I'm saying, on net, all things considered, it's justified.
All things considered.
Yeah, which is the type of justification you're saying God has, right? The same type of justification you're saying God has is a justification for this state of affairs, right? It's to say this is the best possible state of affairs. So no matter what you do, you did say that God has brought about the best possible state of affairs. You did say that.
No, I never made that claim.
If you did, in this debate I asked you whether or not it's the case God... Yes, it's recorded. You're wrong.
It's recorded that I did not say this. I specifically said...
That's not how recordings work, but you don't record a lack of audio, you record the audio. But it is recorded on
a lack of something happening based off watching a recording and listening to a recording.
So that's not what I just said. So what I'm saying is that... And also answer your question, no. Hold on, you don't need to just pull out the air. I just want to fucking focus on the argument here. So, if you don't think it's the case that God created the best possible state of affairs, then you're not a necessitarian.
That doesn't follow.
So, is it the case that there's any better state of affairs that's possible?
Depends on the modal scope you're employing of the conversation.
Logical.
Okay, no.
No, okay. So, if it's not logically possible to have a better state of affairs, this is the best possible state of affairs. All other modal scopes will be more narrow than logical. So I don't know why you ask what it depends on the modal scope. It doesn't, apparently.
Of course, you'd have to class the clarification question. Of course, definitely.
Are there modal scope? What modal scope are you thinking of where there are things that are logically impossible but possible in the modal scope?
Demonstrate the relevance of this question, please.
Because you made a claim. It directly addresses your claim.
You made the claim. What claim did I make which made the question relevant?
You're just ruling. So if you think it's the case, right? Okay. If you think it's the case that the modal scope would matter there, then obviously you think that there are some modal scopes where things which are logically impossible can be possible in that modal scope. Yes?
How does that follow?
Isn't it just trivial?
Someone can ask you a question. Hold on. Just to be clear, just to clear all the confusion here, someone can ask you a question regarding what modal scope you're referring to without making any sort of independent proposition on the nature of other modal scopes as it pertains to the conversational content.
If you're asking what modal scope am I referencing, and there's only one state of affairs that's logically possible, then it's irrelevant what modal. Because if I was asking about any other modal scope, the answer would be the same, which is yes, this is the best possible state of affairs across all of them, because it's the best logically possible according to you. So if it's the best logically possible state of affairs, yes. If it's the best logically possible state of affairs, because if something is logically necessary, then it's necessary on all more narrow modal scopes.
Could I finish the question real quickly before you ask me a question? Where's the logical contradiction in someone granted the proposition that this is the best logically possible state of affairs, and there's some conceptual assessment of modality which would actually make it the case that my question was relevant? Where's the contradiction?
So I just told you. So the contradiction is that Do you want? I can put in the P and not P, but the P and not P is not going to get you any more clear. So you can give a contradiction in more phrases than P and not P. That's ridiculous. So here's the form of P and not P, because if you have any contradiction, all other contradictions follows. So the contradiction is both that it's the case that it is not a logical necessity for this particular state of affairs to be the case, and that it is a logical necessity for this particular state of affairs to be the case.
The second proposition right of the contradiction, could you establish the deductive entailment between what you're talking about and the second proposition?
For the second one?
Yeah, which is that there's no logical necessity.
No. Okay, so that's what you're asking about. So you're asking, there's not a logical necessity. Why do I think that's entailed? Well, the reason why it's entailed is because you're saying it's the case that you did not agree. You don't think it's the case. This is the logical, or that this is the best possible state of affairs, right? And if you're saying it's not the best possible, but it is the best logically possible, that means it's logically. Yes, you did. Okay, you're doing like an autism thing where you're just like confused at what's going on in the conversation. So I'm going to try to move the conversation forward instead of looping on the silly point here. So let's hopefully move the conveying here. Yeah, because if you're not understanding this is genuinely just like schizophrenia.
I feel concerned about the fact that
everything that you're going to do in this conversation is because you're just going to rely on you forgetting the things that you've said, I'm going to try my best to just remind you of them as it happens, and then we're going to move forward in the conversation by hopefully pointing out that you think it's the case that we exist in the best logically possible state of affairs. So, just to be clear, no matter what I do, we are still in the logically best possible state of affairs. You muted yourself, but I wasn't serving it there. Everything that we do, we are still in the logical. I don't know why you're just trying to fucking fill out the dead air here. Like, I try my best to let you talk when you want to talk, but you just constantly talk over. And it doesn't work for you because your microphone's garbage, right? So just listen. So if you think the situation that we are currently in, no matter what decision you possibly make, is still the logically best possible state of affairs, and you know that's the case, you know it's the case for the logically best possible state of affairs, then you know the world could not have been any better if it was the case that you didn't beat that baby to the shovel. It wouldn't have made the world any better. It would have been a worse world.
Yeah, so there's a confusion there. So there's a confusion you've been making the entire time, whereas you confused me specifically saying I've not made a specific claim, and me saying I specifically disbelieve in the proposition that this is the best logically possible state of affairs. I've clarified on numerous occasions, right, when you've asked the question specifically, which is it the case that this is the best possible way in which the world could have been? I said it depends on what you mean by possibility, what's the modal scope there. You interpreted that as, hold on, quiet. You interpreted me asking a clarificatory question regarding what modal scope you're employing in that specific question, with me specifically making an affirmative proposition regarding this not being the best logically possible state of affairs after I quite literally then...
You said it is the best logically possible state of affairs. Yeah, I know, that's what a contradiction is. Yeah, that's a contradiction.
I was saying something which contradicts that. Yeah, you can't say that the individual proposition is a contradiction.
No, I'm saying the contradiction is the fact that you both affirmed that proposition and negated it, because what you said is it depends on the modal scope, when in fact, because you said it depends on the modal scope.
Okay, so what about me saying it depends on the modal scope, which entails that I make it the negation of the proposition that it is the best?
That would mean that for some modal scopes, the answer would be different.
Okay, so hold on there a second. You understand that there's nothing within you establishing modal semantical relevancy which would establish the idea that I would be affirming the negation of the proposition you think I affirmed previously, which would establish the contradiction.
So look, I'll explain it to you, right? Well, it definitely does. It's very obvious why it does, but I'll explain it to you step by step. I'm going to ask you a couple of yes or no questions to hopefully get you that, right? The first one is, do you agree that for it to depend on the modal scope, that would mean that there are some modal scopes for which it's the case that this is not the best possible world?
That does not have to be true. But that's one of the...
Yes, it does.
Fail that. No, it could be the case that you're not making an affirmation regarding there being such modal scopes.
So you don't recognize that. So the answer is no, you don't recognize that.
I'm saying that's not necessary to be...
Can you answer my question?
For someone to express such judgment.
Okay. You think you can say it depends on the modal scope, even though no matter which modal scope you choose, it's always the same answer? You think that's consistent?
I think it is consistent in the sense where you can make an argument that it possibly depends on the modal scope, which would allow for the possibility of the question you're asking to actually not be relevant to what I was talking about.
Okay, so here's an example, right? So imagine that I ask you, are there eggs at the store? And then you say, well, it depends on which store I go to. And then I ask, okay, are there any stores around you that don't have eggs? And then you say, no, they don't have eggs. And then I ask you, wait, hold on. So you said it depends which store you go to? And you say, yeah, it does. And I say again, but are there any that don't have eggs? And you say, no, they've all got eggs. But it still depends on which one I go to, whether or not they have eggs. Would you see why that would be like a retarded way to speak and would honestly be a contradiction? In that
example, definitely. But you have to understand there are former nuances in the current thing we're talking about.
There's not a matter of nuances. If you are saying, if you're saying that it's the case that it depends on the modal scope, that would mean that some of the modal scopes would use different answers. Because that's what depends means.
Repeat every single thing you've just said. Background.
Okay.
Yes.
I got you. So if you're saying the answer to that question depends on X, that would mean that for some of the X's that you could choose, the answer would be different. That's what depends means.
It is different, or it could be different?
It is.
Okay, so what if I'm just referencing the possibility of it being different, which is why I'm not...
Then you wouldn't say it does depend, you would say it could depend.
Not necessarily. So, for instance, if you, let's say, ask me, I'll give you an example. All right, so the store example, right? So let's say I'm not even aware of whether or not there are any other stores which I could purchase a specific item from. And so you ask me a specific question, right, regarding the price of a given item you want to purchase. And I say, well, whether or not it costs XYZ price depends on the store you're going to. Now, that claim specifically does not mean it's inherently presupposing that there are any other stores, right? Because for all I know, there could be
you're presupposing. It would mean that you do think it's the case that there are different prices, different stores.
Wait, you were complaining about me interrupting a while ago, so just let me finish this point real quick.
All you did
I was just gonna say, yeah, that's fine. I was just gonna say that, in the case I'm talking about, we'll just say it depends on the store you are going to purchase a particular item. Okay. I'm making this claim, or rather, I'm making that claim. However, it is not the case that I'll necessarily be affirming the existence of other stores, but rather I'm granting and acknowledging, instead of neglecting the possibility of there being other stores, which is why the claim seems feasible, even if it's just one store which exists. Right?
Okay, so the issue is it's actually not even possible, right? So, one, I think your example there, you're still crazy, right? So in the example, no, if it depends which store you go to, what the price will be, that means that different stores have different prices. That's true. Yeah, different stores do have different prices. The way it does depend on which store you go to. If every store had one fixed price, then somebody saying that it depends which store you go to, they'd be fucking crazy. But the funny thing is, you can't even invoke the possibility argument there. Even if all of that wasn't fucking crazy, which it definitely is, even if it wasn't fucking crazy, you couldn't invoke the possibility argument because it's not possible. It's logically necessary for this state of affairs to be the way it is, so it's impossible for any modal scope. No matter what the modal scope you choose is, it would be impossible for it to be otherwise, because all the modal scopes are going to be more narrow than logical. Do you think there is a modal scope which is less narrow, broader than the logical modal scope? Yes or no?
So, before I respond to that question, I'm going to address the
Bro, this guy does not answer the question.
That question? No, I'm going to answer the points you've made first. That's how it's going to work. So
you definitely don't answer the question.
Hold on. This conversation started off from some minuscule problems, confusions you've had, and it just keeps on increasing. So, the example you've given, okay, you talk about it being crazy. No, Sinthe, it's not crazy, actually. Maybe if you actually understood the crux of what my point actually is, it isn't crazy. Right? Because, again, all I'm saying there, and all I'm presupposing there, is that what determines and fixes the prices of a specific item is the store you're purchasing that item from. Now, you can agree with this proposition.
So different stores at different prices, right?
You're being a bit too hasty, Sinthe. You're being way too hasty.
You're never going to answer my question, bro.
So, Sinthe, hold on. Okay.
Let's hear.
So, I was just going to say that, we both grant this proposition. However, that proposition can be granted even if it is the case that someone does not have a judgment regarding whether or not there are only one store that exists or more than one store that exists. They're just saying it depends on the store in the sense where if you were to buy it from a store which could exist, which does not exist, the price may change. That's rational, and there's nothing crazy about this. I'm not sure you don't understand this.
Okay, ironically, this may just be an ESL moment because this is fucking deranged, but you said you were going to answer my question and you still didn't. You think you answered my question?
Definitely correct.
Do you think you've answered my question?
Absolutely.
What was my question that you answered?
The question regarding you asking me if it is the case that there's some compatibility between believing that it depends on the store you're purchasing the item from, and you believing that it is the case that it is the only store. In the sense where it will not create an unintuitive consequence. That was the point.
No. I asked you very simply, yes, you are correct that that is not the question. That was not the question. You were very wrong about what the question was. However, here's the question. I'll present it again, and I will give you what the question was, and hopefully you'll hear it, okay? Here's the question. The question I asked you was, yes or no, do you believe that there is a modal scope which is more broad than logical? Do you think you've answered that question?
I don't have a judgment on that proposition.
Okay, you don't have a judgment on whether or not you answered that question?
You don't have to affirm a proposition regarding the nature of other modal scopes.
Okay. So I'm glad that you are... I'll be honest with you, I do consider I am agnostic on that. Even though it's a crazy answer, I do agree that I am agnostic on that as an answer, but how was an answer to the question that you had not answered previously, and somehow you managed to dodge a new question. So just to be really clear, you agree that prior to saying that you're agnostic on it, or you don't have a judgment on it, you had not answered that question, correct?
I would not say so. I would not say that.
You need to listen to this back, bro. You fucking sound crazy.
Hold on, I think me saying currently that I'm agnostic on whatever the question was you're talking about, I think me saying this is just an emphasis and the repetition of what I've said previously, which you've just not tracked. So if anything,
I don't think I'm having issues tracking.
Finally grasping the thing I've not dodged.
I feel like I'm having a really easy time tracking you. I feel like you're just saying a bunch of stupid shit. And generally, I don't think you say that much stupid shit. So I think there are a lot of viewers that I disagree with you on. They're not that stupid. But
okay, wait,
look, here's the issue. I don't know why you're look, I gave you time to speak. Right? You talk for these like long monologues that relate in no way to what's being said. And then you interrupt constantly. The Apollo strategy. Here's the Apollo strategy. It's the breakdown. This is where we throw the nukes out. We talk about the other person's strategy. We make it really hard for the other person to debate in the future. Here's the Apollo strategy. Is long-winded, rambling nonsense that no way relates to the point, and you dodge every question constantly, and then you feign agnosticism when somebody presses you on the question. As long as you just mock that, there's literally nothing else he's got. So, Apollo, we'll go through the argument. I'm going to get you... Don't worry, buddy. We're moving forward in the argument. I'm going to make sure that you... I'm going to force you to move forward instead of just us looping back and forth on meta. Here's the move forward. So, if you think it's the case that it's logically necessary, then if it's logically necessary for things to be the way they are, then they could not have been different no matter what I did. Because I couldn't have done differently, in fact. No matter if something's logically necessary, if some state of affairs is logically necessary, then I couldn't have made it any other way. So, if an action, as you've agreed, an action is when you bring about a state of affairs, if it's the case that it's the best possible state of affairs, is the one that is the result of my action, and that's true for any action anyone's ever done, then for any action anyone's ever done, they've brought about the best possible states of affairs. If somebody's brought about the best possible states of affairs, then they are justified in that action. If they knowingly do so, they are justified under every sane view. If you right now, Apollo, if you beat a baby to death with a shovel, according to the claims that you've already said out loud, that would entail that you've done the thing which you knew to bring about the best possible state of affairs. True? Yeah, we're gonna hit the hay after. Alright, we should, if Apollo's gone, we should move on to Puppy Coco, who wants to be pulled up. Puppy Coco, is still in chat? Yeah, Puppy Coco's still in chat. You gotta raise your hand.
Yeah, I got muted. My bad. So just to respond to what you've said, really, I'm going to adjust everything you've said. I was just going to say, I just found it really comical. You complained, Sinthe, about long-winded responses, and they gave the longest response of the conversation. Just to address a couple of things, right? Let's relax for a second. You're like really spazzing out. So just to address a couple of things, no, Sinthe, I don't agree that it is the case. If it is the case, and the fake laugh is going to help you right now. If it is the case that it is logically necessary for X to occur, then it could not be the case that under some other given modal scope, it could actually be possible.
Not a different modal scope.
I don't agree with this proposition, actually.
Nobody said a different modal scope.
Hold on. I don't have to be able to specifically articulate the modal scope for me to grant the possibility, the epistemic possibility that such modal scope exists. But I would like to ask you the question.
An epistemic possibility of that modal scope existing? Doing
that thing again, whereas you're just trying to steamroll the conversation with quicksilver rhetoric, instead of actually addressing the substance because you're and you're laughing because you're coming to the self-realization that what I'm saying is actually correct. So
that's right.
Quickly, you've been deviating from the thing that I'm trying to press me on, which is simply how does it follow from the antecedents there? then under all specific conceptual assessments of the term possibility, it would be the case that it is not sure that it could be otherwise. Granting
because
logicalness.
Yeah, given you said an epistemically possible modal scope, there's no time that needs to be taken, you just have to listen. So given you said epistemically possible modal scope, I'm sure you agree epistemic possibility is more narrow than logical possibility, correct?
I'm agnostic on that claim, depends on one's epistemology.
You're agnostic? What?
Absolutely.
You think there are things which are epistemically possible, but logically, you think they are logically impossible? You think those exist?
Depends on the logical system you accept, Sinthe, which grounds your epistemology. That's not surprising.
Under the logical system you accept is the one we're indexing it to.
I thought you're making a much more holistic claim in assessment.
The logical system that you ascribe to, in which you think it's the case that all states of affairs are logically necessary. What do you mean, wow? If you think it's the case that you're trying to adapt to pretend that you have my rhetorical style, it's really corny, it's just really weird. So just engage with the argument. What you said is that it's the case that it's logically necessary. So, are there things which are, according to your definition of the words logical and your definition of the word epistemic, are there things which are epistemically possible but logically impossible? Yes or no?
And all the confusion, Sinthe. So the first time when
yes or no to my question, retard. Don't do this over and over again. Yes or no?
This weird thing which you believe.
Look, the only thing that we can do with Apollo is you just have to force him to get a yes or no answer out. Yes or no, Apollo?
Is nothing you're doing is.
Look, I'm asking for a yes or no to my question. Is it the case there are things which are logically impossible but epistemically possible? Yes or no?
I'm going to wait.
Is it the case there are things which are logically impossible but epistemically possible? Yes or no?
Not a yes or no question, Sinthe. I'll explain why. Do you want me to explain why it's not a yes or no question?
Is that a proposition embedded in that question?
Just because there's a proposition embedded in the question does not mean that the responses to that question in the form of yes or no or I agree or I disagree would be sufficient responses which would be informative.
You can they're not sufficient, but they should be the beginning of your response. This is a proposition. So it's true or false. All propositions are true or false. You're not going to respond to the question. You ignore the question and go on a look for the dialogue. So yes or no, is this true?
Yes or no,
it's true or it's not true.
Are sufficient informative responses, Sinthe.
I don't care what you think is an informative response. I just want an answer.
You don't think truth can depend on context, Sinthe?
Answer my question.
Answer my question.
Your question came after me. I'm not going to answer
it. So now it's funny because now you're going to actually complain about me asking you a yes or no question when you were actually complaining about this previously.
I'm not complaining about your question being a yes or no. I'm complaining about it being a question that came after mine as a dodge of my question.
You don't think my question relates to your
question? Was there any part of my question you didn't understand?
I understand every single part of your question. It was one-dimensional, Sinthe. Really
okay, then you should be able to answer you should be able to give me an inquiry as per the one fucking dimension of that question. Is it true? Or is it a not yes true no, proposition?
Sinthe, I don't know if you're just really
I'm sorry, you believe the law of the fundamental
that there are questions that can be answered.
You can say, I don't know. No. That's fine. Do you not know?
I know that you just don't have the social cues to understand.
You're not going to answer that question either. This is insane.
Which is actually not dodging the question.
This is the most embarrassing thing I've ever heard you do, genuinely. So I'm asking you very simply, right?
Like another projection of your
I want to hopefully move the conversation forward in some way and hopefully make some dialectical progress, but I know you don't want that to happen. So I'm going to try my best to get you to understand this. So, do you think it's the case that there is any random thing, any random state of affairs, which is logically impossible, but epistemically possible? You can say yes, no, or I don't know, and if you don't want any of those three, would you rather say I prefer not to answer? Which one of those would you go with?
It can be both, dependent on the epistemology sense.
Oh my god, I'm asking about yours. I already told you very clearly, based on your definition of epistemology.
Hold on.
There we go, no, it wasn't a complicated question. Thank you so much. You finally answered the question. The answer is no. So, if there is nothing, no, it doesn't matter what you look. If you think it's the case that it's not epistemically, under your definitions, when you invoke those terms, if it is not epistemically possible to have something which is logically impossible, then it must be the case that any modal scope which you have epistemic access to must be one which is more narrow or equally narrow to the logical modal scope. You cannot have one that's more broad. This very trivially straightforwardly follows. So, it does not depend on which modal scope you go. It does not depend on which... No, I'm not done. It does not depend on which... I'm just going to fucking ramble indefinitely like you. So, it does not depend on which fucking modal scope you choose. There's no modal scope dependency there. If it's logically necessary, then it's necessary under all the other modal scopes that you believe are real. Every single one that you're committed to, you think that each and every other single one is also logically necessary under that one. So you should have no more modal scope confusion for the rest of this debate. Now going forward, making some dialectical progress now, if it's the case that you think that I don't know why you're doing the laughing thing like you're trying to affect the rhetoric. If you think it's the case that the state of affairs that you're currently in are logically necessary, you're not doing well here. Okay. If you think the current state of affairs and all state of affairs that have ever existed are logically necessary, then there's nothing that you've ever done which would not make the world the best possible world, because it is the only possible world. If it is the only possible world, then it is the best possible world. True or false?
Now that you're done, yapping.
I mean, it's not what I did. That's so sad. So that's exactly what I fucking thought would happen. So let's try again. The question I asked you was a true, false question. You can say, I don't know, or I prefer not to answer. Which one do you want?
So scared for me to give a response. If you give a long one,
I'm fucking scared of you. You're like,
of course you
did terrible.
In the back on us right now. So anyways, I'm going to address the point and explain to you and dog walk you through it.
Do you want to dog walk through an answer to my question?
Yeah, I'm gonna dog walk you through why you made a non-point, fuck. So just to be clear, this
oh my god, he's never gonna answer.
The acceptance of the
this is so incredibly sad.
You're yapping again. You're doing this weird thing where you believe.
Why wouldn't I interrupt you? You're just obviously interrupting. You're just obviously constantly interrupting. I'm gonna interrupt you back. And if you don't have any kind of response to my questions, you can't answer true or false.
I've never seen this.
I'm fucking petrified.
Never seen this.
Can you just try your best to answer my question?
So could I just finish the point I was gonna make? So just to be
clear, you can't finish the point you were gonna make. Answer my question, then you can finish your point.
Sinthe, you're confused.
What are you doing? This is so pathetic.
Look,
just answer the question. I don't care what you think the confusion is. No, answer the question, then address the point.
And then want me to address your question. I'm gonna address the points first.
If you answer the question, look, the issue, I would trust you to do that if it wasn't for the things that I've already fucking shat on you for doing in this debate. We've all seen you attempt, look, you've poisoned everyone with that strategy now. You can't use that rhetorical strategy anymore. Because after you said you were going to address my points, then answer the question, what you ended up doing was not answering the question at all, and you even seem to recognize you and not answer the question. So, I would like you to answer my question first, and the moment that you answer my question, I will go silent, let you ramble for as long as you want to. So, if you want to answer my question, do that up front, because I know damn well you're not actually going to append it to the end, because we caught you not doing that earlier. Everyone saw it happen.
Promise me you'll not talk when I'm talking, to respond to the other point.
I promise you, after you answer my question, I will not speak. I will interrupt you if you dodge my question. So, my question to you, right? I want to make some dialectical progress here. So, is this true or false? Yeah. If this is the only logically possible state of affairs, then this is the best logically possible state of affairs. True or false?
Under my semantics, definitely true. Now, could I make some addressals or responses to the previous points you made? So, to be clear in this, right, you specifically said, right, that it is the case that clearly, given my epistemology, it would be the case that if it is true that I believe in classical logic clearly, and it would be the case that under my epistemology, it could not be epistemically possible for this to be the case. And I grant this. However, the first point I made, Sinthe, regarding me expressing agnosticism towards the idea of... yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. Anyways, someone's giving me something. Yeah, so me expressing my agnosticism towards the question and whether or not it is possible, or whether it depends on the type of possibility that's been referenced, for it to determine whether or not it is possible for some logically possible state of affairs to be not possible, for it to not be the case, or rather some logically necessary. Given that specifically, when I was making that reference, I was not indexing that response to my epistemology. I was making a more holistic approach, insofar as I was saying, given all specific conceptual assessments of epistemology that is available, right, it is in fact possible, doesn't have to be indexed to my epistemology, but just broadly speaking, that you could have a specific situation where something is logically possible, and you're a logical necessitarian, and given some other different modal scope, it is actually not possible. And so, it is the case that there's... Give me 1 second. Hold on. Oh yeah, got you. So anyways, so Sin, just to address a couple of things, right? Someone is complaining about like me speaking a bit too loud because I'm like outside. So anyways, to address a couple of things, as I was saying,
this guy is screaming on a park bench.
No, I'm like actually outside, like right outside my master.
That's crazy. You're like just screaming down the street.
Bro, I'm just like that, bro. I'm
just like that. Your neighbors are like, "Can you keep it down?" You're like, "I got you. I'm sorry." I'm really like that.
Yeah. So, anyways, I just have respect for elders. So
that's right. That old man told you to do.
I think you
don't want you. No, keep going.
Anyways, so I was saying that there's no incompatibility between the most recent claim of made regarding the epistemic possibility not existing, but it being the case that it would be possible given some other, you could say, possible conception of epistemology. That's my point.
That's it. Okay, so
yeah, that's really just
I got some premises. I just want to know if you think these are true or false. So, premise 1: all states of affairs in the real world are the best possible states of affairs. True or false?
Under my system, definitely.
Yeah, we're always talking under your system here. We're talking about do you believe these propositions. So, premise 2: if that's true, then no matter what I do, it will still lead to the best possible state of affairs. True or false?
Of course.
Okay, so if no matter what you do, it will lead to the best possible state of affairs, then if you beat a dog to death, then rape a baby, it will lead to the best possible state of affairs. True or false?
Yeah, given the fact I'm involved in the causal chain.
Yes, true or false? True or false?
What's up?
So is that a true or a false to premise 3?
Is it true that it is moral? No.
No, it's not premise 3. Right? Premise 3 is, if no matter what you do...
Properly, so
I've noticed.
Assume what you're saying causes the background noise.
Yeah, so if no matter what you do, it would still lead to the best possible state of affairs, then if you beat a dog to death, then rape a baby, it would lead to the best possible state of affairs. True or false?
It is the best possible state of affairs, in the sense of logical possibility.
So true.
True? Lead to. When you say lead to, are you just saying
this
that,
is so pathetic. No, I don't know what you're doing.
It's not pathetic.
You're not even good at dodging the question.
You have to clarify the terms there, of course.
Yeah, there's nothing here about
like... not the best logical possible state of affairs?
Well, I could not understand the words that she came out.
Yeah, I'm muting, sorry. I'm asking you, is it the case that when you're saying it leads to the best logically possible state of affairs, are you assuming that it is not the best logically possible state of affairs in the question?
No. Obviously not. So, is that proposition a true or a false proposition under your definition?
The proposition regarding it leading to the best, of course not, because all things in reality would be the best possible state of affairs, logically speaking.
So you said, if all states of affairs in the real world are the best possible states of affairs, then no matter what you do, it would still lead to the best possible states of affairs is true. You said that.
Of course.
Okay, so if no matter what you do, it would lead to the best possible state of affairs, then if you beat a dog to death and rape a baby, it would lead to the best possible state of affairs. True or false?
Of course.
Okay, so then not false, it's actually true. So, there we are. Premise 3, true. So, given those premises, the conclusion is, if you beat a dog to death and rape a baby, it will lead to the best possible state of affairs. That is logically valid given premises you've agreed to, yes?
Of course.
Okay, so if you beat a dog to death and rape a baby, it will lead to the best possible state of affairs. And you know this to be true, yes?
Yep.
Okay, so you would know that if you beat a dog to death and rape the baby, it will lead to the best possible state of affairs. Agree?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so that's the reductio on your fucking view.
So the issue as to why it's not a reductio is because there's like a lot of equivocation. So to be clear on this, you assume first and foremost that like the moral responsibility or accountability, which would make something immoral and moral respectively, is going to specifically and sufficiently be determined based off whether or not it leads to the best possible state of affairs given my semantics, which is not true. My account of moral accountability, which determines an action being moral and immoral respectively, is dependent on whether or not you participate in some sort of like causal relation to an action which is non-formal like. So if you are familiar with Aristotelian causality, you'd understand this. That's just one of them, and the other one is having the irrational faculty to understand the moral facts, or to know the moral facts. And so,
I don't know how you even have Aristotelian talk here.
Hold on.
So completely the idea you have Aristotelian talk is like deranged, given that you think we are in a logically necessary condition. So people don't have capacities.
Again, or you're interrupting again. You're interrupting again.
Shit, we interrupt each other constantly. Like you can't do the thing.
If I answered your questions, you're not interrupting, right?
Yo, guys, real quick.
So just the other things you can think.
Wait, Apollo.
Yeah.
So Synth is over.
Does someone want to prematurely end the
hour? Synth, do you want to keep going, or do you need to be somewhere? Because I'm fine with, like, if you guys want to wrap it up within the next 10 minutes.
Even though I usually go to bed at like 10 p.m.ish, and it is 10 p.m. my time, we can do a little bit more.
You got
one. Give the response.
Oh, my bad. Is it fixed?
Yeah, so...
Yeah.
Alright. Yeah, so do you want to respond to your point, Synth, or are you gonna keep on speaking over me?
If you guys want to wrap it up, give it like another 10 minutes, that's cool, but...
Yeah,
I was making sure.
Like another 5 minutes or whatever. It should be fully fleshed out by then. Okay, so... the reductio, basically, you're trying to pull off here is just to point out that given any action, considering that every specific event is the best possible or leads to the best possible state of affairs, it is the case that such event or action is morally justified. I don't think that follows. Given my account of moral justification, it would not follow. So for the LPOU to actually be successful, it has to be the case that given my account of moral justification, it is the case that these actions would be morally justified, or rather it is the case that either all of those actions, which are obviously immoral, will be morally justified, or it is the case that God specifically does immoral actions, granted that these actions are not morally justified. None of these specific disjuncts are satisfied or justified or extrapolated on given the quote-unquote reduct you think you've landed. And one more thing is specifically that, again, as I've specified previously, and I'll specify and re-emphasize on this point again, by moral accountability, right, I have a specific notion of moral accountability, which for one, my account of ethics does not specifically and is not sufficiently determined based off the optimality principle of utilitarianism. It doesn't even bake in that concept. So to even apply that and just use this as some sort of non-point thinking that it is successful is actually preposterous to me. But if you have any other responses you'd like to give, I'm free to hear that.
Yeah, so I like the fact that you are now walking back the reasons why you gave for an action to be justified, because you said the reason why God is justified is because his actions bring about the best possible state of affairs. You did say that. Agreed?
Never said this.
Yes, you did. Okay. Well, this is the issue with an Apollo debate, is it was like lie about what's happening in the debate.
What I said, and I know for a fact I have not said this. What I said specifically is that the reason as to why God's actions would be justified is because, for one, it is the case he is never, or rather, it is the case that he's not morally accountable for the actions. And I've already specified my conceptual analysis of moral accountability, which has no relevancy to actualization of best possible worlds. So I know for a fact he does not track in the conversation.
So then, God is unaccountable for these actions, you say, yes?
No, he isn't. He's not morally accountable.
Okay. Then he's not justified in these actions, correct?
Doesn't follow that he's not justified.
It does. If you're not accountable for an action, you can't be justified in it. Am I justified in you beating a baby to death?
Excuse me?
Am I justified in you beating a baby to death? Doesn't make sense.
Me beating a baby to death?
Yeah, that's nonsense, right? Like, obviously, I can't be justified in you beating a baby to death. I can be justified in the things that I'm doing. I can't be justified in something you're doing.
An argument?
Now, normal people understand the issue here.
Yeah, so no, there's no issue there. You don't understand the argument here. The argument pointing out here is that there's nothing immoral about what God has done. Okay, so when I'm talking about omnibenevolence, I specifically defined this in the beginning. I've said it's a morally perfect being, and then I went on to say that by moral perfection, what I mean there, that the assessment is just a being which has never committed an immoral action. And I said, and I asked you numerous occasions, is it the case that granting this specific element or attribute of God specifically, and the other omni-attributes, do you believe there's a contradiction? You said on 2 to 3 different occasions, yes, you still believe there's a contradiction. Cool, understood. Now I've explained to you as to why, given that assessment, it would be the case that he would not commit an immoral action, and so his moral perfection is still something which is sustained. So when I'm talking about God being morally justified in creating these events, all I just mean there, right, whether you want to say it's proprietary or it's non-proprietary, is just simply that he did not do anything wrong despite being an intentional agent which caused these events to occur.
So you can be justified in an action that somebody else did.
In the case of God's, yes, because God...
No, in the case of broadly, your definition of justification means I can be justified in an action you did.
That's so disanalogous, Sinthe. You're even understanding.
It's not an analogy. That's not what analogies are. I'm asking you very directly.
It's an analogy. You can say something is.
You just said that's disanalogous. I'm telling you, I don't intend it to be analogous because it's not supposed to be an analogy. So track through what I'm saying. This you are silly yourself.
Does not necessarily reflect some postulate in an analogy. They can be used interchangeably with the words similar or the same. So that's retarded. So let's get back to what those say.
Genuinely, you need to up your English knowledge. It's like really sad. So trying your best to follow my argument here. I want you to do this. I asked you a question. I just want to know: is it the case, right, that your definition of justification, your definition of being justified, is just that you did not do anything wrong?
In the context of God, where he's morally perfect and he's an agent, yes, for sure, definitely. In the context
of God?
Yes.
Okay, so you're equivocating. You have a different definition in the God context than in every other context.
That's not even what equivocation is. But do you want to understand my point, or do you keep on speaking over me? Which one is it? So what my point is simply, all I mean in this context of this conversation, I say God is morally justified, is simply, he's a moral agent. He intentionally caused all of these things. But nonetheless, he's not morally accountable for these things. That's all I mean there. Now, if you want to be a pedantic princess about the semantics and say, oh, generally speaking, people don't use the word. I don't care to argue but you should actually...
You don't use the word that way. That's the problem, is that you use the word in a different way in every other instance, other than the moment you talk about God. You think in that sense of justification, now it's the case that all justified means is you haven't done anything wrong. So, if you were an atheist, you would still think God is justified.
No.
If God didn't exist, would you think that God has ever done anything wrong?
You're saying God is morally justified assuming that he exists.
If God didn't exist, would he have ever done anything wrong? Yes or no?
Are you affirming this to be an analytic fact or a synthetic fact?
Yes or no?
If it's a synthetic fact, no, you'd not be affirming him to be morally justified. Definitely not.
If God didn't exist, would he have ever done anything wrong? You say no.
Depends on the type of fact you're trying to postulate, Sinthe.
If you didn't exist, would you have ever done anything wrong?
No, you'd not be affirming this proposition.
If God didn't exist, would he have done anything?
You can be an error theorist and say all propositions about God, given that specific context, would be false.
This is so embarrassing. You know people can tell what you're doing, right?
It's not embarrassing. You're just not understanding the point, which is if you're not stipulating God's existence in the proposition...
Genuinely, who do you think is dumb enough to fall for this? That real question. Who in the fucking chat down below do you think is dumb enough to fall for this? Name one.
Every single thing, you have not given any response and illegitimate.
Name one person down below who you think would fall for this.
I'm not even looking at my screen, and I'm pretty certain that there are people below who believe this. But do you want to focus on what I'm saying?
I focused on what you're saying, and what you're saying is a dodge. What you're saying is a dodge. So, I'm going to ask this over and over again, and hopefully one day we'll get the Apollo answer. So, I'm asking you, if God didn't exist, would he have done anything? This should be a very simple no.
It depends on the proposition, Sinthe. I've just explained this.
It really doesn't. The proposition is, if God didn't exist, then he didn't do anything. True or false? Is that a true or false proposition?
Well, if the proposition is attempted to convey some given fact about something which exists, then no, it should not be the case it's true.
If it was trying to convey something about something that did exist, then it still wouldn't be true.
Do you understand what I mean when I'm talking about someone believing that all propositions about God being systematically false?
You don't genuinely, you should stop pretending to be smug. This is like embarrassingly bad for you. This is the one debate that you should look at yourself in the mirror afterwards and admit to yourself that you did fucking terrible. You're clearly dodging a question over and over again.
You're not giving any responses, son. You're not giving any responses at all.
Do you think my question can be answered with a yes or no?
It's logically possible? Yeah, definitely. It's logically possible.
Okay. Are you able to?
Of course.
Okay, would it be a yes or a no?
I would say it would be neither.
Guys,
Okay, look, at that point, look, I'm fine with ending the debate there.
You want to give conclusions?
That was the conclusion.
That's your conclusion? I'll just give my conclusion.
That's both of our conclusion.
Oh, really?
Alright, we got more people to move through. We're not doing like a conclusion thing. So look, we should move to the next person here. This is like embarrassingly stupid from Apollo.
Yeah, it was embarrassing for you, dog. You're just not giving any contradiction.
No, you actually. You were the one who was embarrassed.
Wait.
Bring Puppy Coco up. Puppy Coco's
supposed to go first. Yeah, I'm not more important.
Does anyone else want to? I do have stuff I need to do. If anyone else wants to, Moxie, if you want to come up and mod. I don't think Mercury can talk right now.
Okay, so Sinthe, I just have a couple of really quick questions. You'll probably like wrap this up and then back me up really quick, but I just want to ask. So, why is something bad? Like, how you know something's bad?